What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG. We like magic, and today I've got one of the most fun budget brews that I'm going to bring to you all season. This thing's a blast, and it's actually pretty competitive. Here's $25 Mono Black Monument. Believe it or not, this thing actually picked up a lot of pieces from Rivals of Ixalan. There's over 20 new cards in this deck. It's kind of crazy, but I got to start with the card that's been around for a while, and it's kind of the whole point of the deck. We're going to play 4 copies of Bontu's Monument. Just like any monument deck, no matter what monument we're building around, let's keep it real, Oketra's, but just like any monument deck, we're going to play a playset of this even though it's legendary. But that's because we want to see it on turn 3 as reliably as possible. I mean, our entire game plan is based around monument. We need it as early as we can get it, as often as we can get it. And, you know, in a world full of Abrades flying around, no matter like what you're playing against, you're probably going to run up against Abrade. Like, it's nice to be able to have another copy of Monument locked and loaded for when your first one crumbles, because there's a pretty high likelihood that's going to happen. Also, just like other Monument decks, this thing can lead to some crazy explosive plays on turn 4 and turn 5. And even though this doesn't give us like the raw board presence that Oketra's Monument can, put it in these terms. Let's look on the bright side. Let's try to be optimistic. Let's say that Oketra's Monument gave you 1/1 tokens, like it already does, that had haste, or unblockable, and had lifelink, but they died like at the end of combat or something, you know. So that's kind of what we're getting out of this. We get immediate value at the very least, immediate life loss on their side, immediate life gain. We don't even have to resolve the creatures to get those drains. I like a lot about Bontu's Monument. It might be the second best monument. If it's not better than Oketra's, it's at least the second best. But of course, if we're going to abuse Monument, then we have to play a buttload of creatures. All of the creatures we possibly can, and we've managed a little bit over 30 in this deck. But a lot of our creatures are our spells. You'll see what I mean in just a second. But since we have so many creatures to cover, I might as well get down to it. So I want to start with the 4 copies of Dusk Legion Zealot and the 4 copies of Oathsworn Vampire. Now, both of these are awesome in a Monument deck, you know. Even if you don't have your Monument out, Zealot's pretty good on turn 2. You get a body, a free card, chump block, whatever. But if you do have a Monument out, it costs 1 mana to get a body and draw a card, hit your opponent for 1, and you get basically 0 sum on your life total. You know, you lose 1, you gain 1. So, Zealot's insane. It's just almost any point of the game, but especially when you have a Monument out. But Oathsworn, seriously, looks like it was made with Monument in mind, to me. It just has the perfect wording to synergize with Monument. Note that you cast it from your graveyard, meaning that even if it's in your bin and you have a Monument out, you can still only pay 1 mana and get a drain whenever you get your Oathsworn out of the graveyard. That's pretty awesome, but it also, Bontu's Monument essentially changes the text on Oathsworn to, it can come back whenever you cast a creature spell, which is way better than whenever you gain life. And, you know, basically whenever you cast a creature, that's going to be nearly every single turn. So if you need to, your Oathsworn's going to be coming back all the time. And that's especially awesome in multiples. You know, if you got, you know, 2, 3 Oathsworns in your graveyard in the late game, this can lead to some huge life swings where, like, you play 1 creature and you pay 3 mana, get all your Oathsworns out of your graveyard. You know, it's just, you get 4 drains off of that and a bunch of, you know, a full board, essentially. You don't care that they come into play tap. That's a lot of board presence for a very, very small amount of mana. So, Oathsworn is just unbelievable in this deck particularly. And both of these are pretty good against control. You know, you'll take a body and a card against control decks with Zealot, but Oathsworn is particularly annoying against those decks. It's sort of like our Scrap Heap Scrounger. Also note, by the way, one more thing with Oathsworn is that you don't have to resolve the creature that you're casting in order to get a drain and cast Oathsworn out of your graveyard. You know, if they counter a creature that you cast, you still get the cast trigger on Bontu's Monument, you gain the life, and then you can bring back Oathsworn Vampire. So that's pretty annoying against control decks too. Oathsworn is actually ridiculous in this deck. But I'm going to pull the old switcheroo on you here. Most of the creatures in the deck are actually pirates. We're playing 22 pirates in this deck and one big, huge pirate payoff. But let me go ahead and start with Kitesail Freebooter and Direfleet Poisoner. We're playing play sets of both of these. Now, these are some more examples of creatures that are good on their own, but when you have a Monument out, things get really crazy. You know, Kitesail turns into Duress on a evasive body. That's crazy. Like, only having to hold up 1 mana for a Direfleet Poisoner is actually a game changer. You wouldn't believe how important that is. These are also both examples, by the way, of cards that are at least decent against control. Kitesail is obviously great on turn 2 against control, and Direfleet Poisoner is at least above average because you can play it at instant speed, maybe in response to something they're doing or at the end of their turn, for instance, to at least soak up a counterspell to make sure that you have a clear turn, or at least a better chance at a clear turn. So I like a lot about Direfleet Poisoner against control decks too, but it obviously shines against aggro, where it's essentially a 1 mana sometimes, but at least 2 mana removal spell. And, you know, it's also a combat trick sometimes too. That's also really relevant. But the whole reason that like a third of the deck is pirates, there's over 20 pirates in this deck, is so that we can run Forerunner of the Coalition and essentially have 4 more copies of Bontu's Monument. This is, you know, copies 5 through 8 of Monument in this deck for the purposes of hitting our opponent. You know, it doesn't drain, but we will take the extra pings all day, especially if we have a Monument and a Forerunner out. Things can get really ugly really quick, especially when you consider that you can Forerunner for a Forerunner. You know, it plays really, really well with Bontu's Monument, because being able to use Forerunner to then set up future turns with Bontu's Monument is actually a really powerful thing to be able to do. And if you go, just a ridiculous play is going turn 3 Bontu's into 2 Forerunners on the next turn, can just set you up to do some disgusting stuff. You know, you'll hit them for as much as 6 or even more on the next turn, depending on how many cards you have left in your hand. So just Forerunner is crazy. This is another card that gives us a lot of reach, and once we combine it with either itself or a Bontu's Monument, things get very, very gross. Now, we can do a bunch of damage to our opponent with just a couple of creatures after we do get set up, but we run the risk of getting set up and then running out of cards. That's the worst thing that can happen to us, is to get in the top deck mode when we've got them right where we want them. So we've got to play some more cards that we can get some mileage out of, some gas. We've already got Dusk Legion Zealot for that, but it's not a pirate. We want some pirates. But luckily, we do have Ruin Raider, which we're going to play a playset of here. Now, first of all, nothing in the main deck costs more than 3 mana, so this shouldn't hurt too much, and we really do need the gas that badly. We got to get these last few drains in. Even if we can drain for as much as, you know, 6 or 9, God forbid, in the first couple of turns that we get set up with Forerunner and Monument, there's still some life to be drained, like half their life total after that. So Ruin Raider can help us draw some cards. All we have to do is keep dropping creatures. That'll give us drains, that'll give us, you know, Forerunner triggers, that'll bring Oathsworn Vampires out of our graveyard. We just got to keep playing creatures, and Ruin Raider makes it a lot easier to do that. Also, pro tip, sometimes it's worth it to run in creatures, just knowing that they're going to die in combat, just to get a raid trigger off of Ruin Raider or the other raid guy that we're playing in the deck, Deadeye Tormentor. Might as well go ahead and tell you about Tormentor. We're only running a 2 of in the main deck, but either way, sometimes it is right to run in a guy that you know can die in combat, because, you know, you just want the raid trigger that badly, especially if it comes down to getting a removal spell out of your opponent's hand with Tormentor, or just drawing more gas with Raider. That's really relevant, especially, by the way, with Oathsworn Vampire. I'm going to bring that card up a lot in this video because it's really, really relevant to this deck. You know, you can just run in Oathsworn Vampire. You don't care if it dies. You can get it back super easy. I should also point out that these are more cards that are decent against control decks. We've got some good weapons for that. When you add it up, we've got Freebooter, Tormentor, Oathsworn Vampire, Ruin Raider, and even Dusk Legion Zealot, you could argue, are all great main deck pieces against control decks. But to round out the pirate crew here, I might as well go ahead and show you the 4 copies of Grasping Scoundrel. One thing that we actually need is early damage, and Grasping Scoundrel can help us do that. If this just even gets in 2 damage, we're kind of happy with that, but if it gets in 4, we're ecstatic. You know, as far as the source of early damage goes, we can do a lot worse than Scoundrel, and even if we draw it late, as long as we're set up, it can lead to more drains and stuff, and that's really all we want. But while I got the graphic up, there's actually one more creature I want to show you, and it's the only other non-pirate creature in the deck. And it's actually not a vampire either. Just faking you out here. We're just going to play 1 copy of Bontu the Glorified. Just another source of drains, and Bontu is actually a really good mana sink. We don't have a whole lot of those in this deck, so it's good to have some way to efficiently use our mana on turns when we don't draw a creature, and we really needed to. And this is, by the way, another card that's ridiculous with Oathsworn Vampire. I'm just going to say that thing's name over and over in this video, but do note, if you've got a bunch of extra mana, you can always just like sacrifice Oathsworn. Hey, I gained life because I sacrificed it to Bontu. You can just keep bringing back Oathsworn, getting drains off of Bontu's Monument the whole time, and just do this over and over for as long as you have the mana. You can close out a game real quick that way. But there's actually one more. Hey, it's my face. What's up, guys? Missed you. We got one more main deck card before we get into the lands and stuff here. So let me just show you the 2 copies of March of the Drowned that we're playing. At first, I was on Supernatural Stamina for like a few games, and I was like, oh yeah, this card exists in the format. So I decided to play March of the Drowned. And this thing is essentially just straight up card advantage. Just straight up card advantage. You usually get 2 cards for 1 mana, which is an unbelievable deal, you know, especially once you get into the mid and late game. It's inevitable that our creatures are going to die. And by the way, this works pretty well with something like Bontu. You know, you sacrifice dudes, get them back for just the 1 mana. That leads to more, you know, monument triggers. It'll lead to more Forerunner triggers, you know, just for 1 mana. This thing is actually ridiculous value in the mid and late turns. It's really nice to be able to get back all these pirates that have raid triggers or enter the battlefield triggers and stuff like that, or even just Forerunner, which allows you to, you know, go tutor up another one, or, you know, you killed my Forerunner, cool, I get my Forerunner back, I'll go get another Forerunner with it. How you like that, son? So, like, March of the Drowned is actually one of the better cards I think we could play in this deck. I'm thinking about upping it to 3. And we'll play 23 lands in this deck. Now, for the purposes of the budget, I'm just going to run Dry Swamps and pretty much nothing else. But you could jazz things up here with If Near Deadlands. They're about $1 a piece. Scavenger Grounds, same. I think it's like $1.25. Even Field of Ruin if you wanted to do that. Or Arch of Araska, I think would actually be great if you're wanting to get even more, you know, value, card advantage in the late game. Because we can hit Ascend. By the time it gets to, you know, turn 6, 7, you know, we can hit Ascend pretty easily. So you might want to consider Arch. But you know, and even, by the way, Desert of the Glorified is an idea. If you want even more ways to draw cards when you would otherwise draw dead, I think that it's worth maybe including Desert here, which isn't too far out of the budget, obviously. But I'm just going with swamps that all come into play untapped. We can always rely on those. Now here's our sideboard right here. We're mostly just going to try and blow out control as much as we can, because we actually, even though we have some main deck pieces against control, that's a matchup we really don't like. So we're just going to try to hose it as much as humanly possible. You see the Duressor in there for that matchup. Dreamstealer is particularly good in that matchup. We can play more Deadeye Tormentors, and Gonti is also really good against control decks. So we're just going to go all in with a lot of our sideboard slots against control. You also see the Deadeye Tracker there. That's for the Godfarer's Gift matchup. It's pretty good in that matchup, and it's a pirate, so at least it's got that going for it. And we've got Skullduggery for when we come up against other aggro decks. Skullduggery is actually really, really good right now, kid. I know you're sitting there like, Skullduggery, but no. No, try Skullduggery. This thing could almost make the main deck. This is actually a really impressive combat trick, and just a decent removal spell sometimes against all the X1s in the format. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention Argyll's Bloodfast either. This is also against control. So I should point that out too. We have just the one Argyll's Bloodfast. I don't want to go crazy or anything, but we really could give a crap about our life total in that matchup. So anytime we have extra mana, we can draw extra cards. Yes, we want exactly that. Now, while I've got the pretty picture up, I might as well talk about some upgrades you might consider for this deck if you're looking in that direction. The first being Gifted Aetherborn, and this isn't too far out of the budget, which is why it's the first card I bring up. It's about $2 right now, which is just a little bit out of my budget. I wanted this deck to be about $25. We're actually a little bit less than that, but we couldn't comfortably add Aetherborns without it going above 25. So this would be the first thing I'd consider, even if just for the board. I don't know if I'd want to fit this in the main deck, although it is another outlet for getting back Oathsworn Vampire if you want to. So you got to consider that, but I don't know if we want it in the main. I do want it at least in the board as a couple of copies against aggro decks. I think it could serve us well there. Same goes for Fatal Push if we're looking for a good piece against aggro decks. If you've seen a lot of mono red in your local meta, then Fatal Push is something you want to consider, but obviously this is very, very far out of the budget. Another card whose name I should at least mention here while I'm talking about upgrades is Metallic Mimic. Now, 22 pirates isn't all of the pirates in the world, but it might be just enough to consider taking out Dusk Legion Zealot and slotting in Mimic. I like Dusk Legion an awful lot, but Metallic Mimic is really good value over the long game, which is essentially what we're aiming for anyway. And finally, a side grade, another card whose name I think I should at least bring up in this section is Ravenous Chupacabra. I play Gonti in the board, but you could play Ravenous Chupacabra in the board or even in the main deck. But I'm on 4 copies of Ruin Raider, and especially in the aggro matchup, I don't want to risk hitting Chupacabra with Ruin Raider's raid ability. You know, it's just a lot of life lost. I didn't end up playing Ravenous Chupacabra here, but you could consider playing it. This is obviously one of the better black creatures in the whole format, but we don't have like the Scarab God or Godfarer's Gift, so there's really no other way to get extra value out of it, so I don't think it would shine too much, but it might be at least worth considering. And here are your power rankings right here. Final score of 62, which is pretty high marks for a $25 budget deck. You know, this thing runs like a well-oiled machine. You'd be surprised how well this thing does what it's supposed to do. One thing that helps it run so well is that it's got a lot more fuel in the tank than a lot of, 30 creature aggro decks usually have. If you count it all up, literally every single creature that we're playing, except for, say, Scoundrel and Bantu, is a form of card advantage. Seriously, Ruin Raider can get us card advantage. Obviously, Dust Legion Zealot is at least card replacement, so there's that. Even the things like Deadeye Tormentor that make them discard cards, Kitesail Freebooter that make them essentially discard cards. This is a form of card advantage. So almost, very nearly, every single creature in the deck affects either the cards that they're holding or the cards that we're holding. And all this card draw and like March of the Drowned and Oathsworn Vampire, all this makes us, above average resiliency too. Very resilient deck. So this deck actually has an awful lot going for it. It's pretty high offense. We're playing 30 creatures. So it can get some early damage in, but don't worry so much about attacking. This deck is much more about like cultivating a board state. And if your board state does get blown apart, you've got ways to put it back together too. So there's an awful lot this deck has going for it. For just $25, you could definitely have a lot less fun for that amount of money. So give this thing a shot. And if you were interested in like skipping your fancy meal and playing this deck, you could always just click the first link in the description. That'll show you the deck list, and you can buy it if you want to go that far over there at TCG Player. They help sponsor my content. They're good folks, and they got this new feature where if you're selling cards, you can upload an image, and more importantly, if you're buying cards, you can see what you're buying, depending on what you're buying. So give them a try. Check out the deck list. Check out the deck. I actually have a lot of faith in this one. Other things you can do, if you feel like it, are hit the like button. Puts me in more recommended feeds, so hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, or even if you didn't. Just lie to me. I don't care. Just as if it gets more likes out of you, hit the like button. You can also follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, or you can throw me $1 on patreon.com/SBMTG, as I see a lot of you have done. I just told you the restaurant that I've worked at forever just closed down on us with like almost no notice the other day, so I'm kind of full-time YouTube now, and a lot of you like really responded to that, so thank you. I'm really overwhelmed. Like I checked the Patreon and I'm like, what's even happening? So like I don't have words yet or now to really. I'm still like just completely overwhelmed by it and kind of emotional. So I don't have the words to put together correctly good to tell you how thankful I am for that. So if you want to throw me $1 on Patreon and join the slew of people who have helped me out in doing that, I would really appreciate that. It's patreon.com/SBMTG, and I'll cut you a deal. Throw me $1 a month. I'll let you know what decks we're doing the day before we do them, which is cool information. So do all the things, and I'll catch you cats later. I really hope you try this one out, guys. I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.